Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1 is a mouthful of a title that represents a mouthful of a film. Now, that's not to say the 3 hour long Western epic directed and starring Kevin Costner is bad, but it is a lot to deal with, and we're going to cover that a little bit today. The film operates as an anthology with various different character vignettes that are all paying tribute to basically every type of Western of the past 100 years, from the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, and onward. One of those stories involves Sienna Miller. She's a recently widowed mother. Her husband and her son were killed in a Native American Apache raid upon her settlement, and now her and her adolescent daughter are left to fend for themselves in the gritty world of the 1860s American West. She comes into contact with a Union cavalry officer who's played by Sam Worthington, and they develop a pseudo-romance of sorts. And that whole plot line is very reminiscent of a lighter Western from the 40s or 50s, perhaps something with John Wayne, or even something in a television show like Gunsmoke or maybe The Rifleman, something along those lines. There's another storyline involving Kevin Costner that's very similar to a Western that Sergio Leone directed, perhaps Clint Eastwood starred in. Tonally, it's very similar to that, is what I'm trying to say. Kevin Costner is protecting a prostitute named Marigold, who's played by Abby Lee. She is carrying her baby nephew with her, and the baby nephew is being pursued by outlaws who seek to kidnap him and assumedly kill her. Kevin Costner is acting as their bodyguard, if you will. There's a third story in which the title of the film comes from. A plot called Horizon is being marketed and sold off to new settlers, and the man selling this property has no right to do so as it's Native American hunting ground. So when the new settlers come to what they think is their land, they're harshly informed by the Native American tribe that it is not their land. There's various other goings on, and there's a story involving a wagon train and the problems on that wagon train. Most of that is pretty inconsequential to this film. It's not given as much attention as these other three plot lines are, and it's really just there to set up Chapter 2. So I'm not going to cover that in this review, just know that it's there. Now, I want to start off by saying I think this is a good film. I think it's worth your time and that you should go see it. I do have some critiques with it, but I'll start off with the good things first. The cinematography is great. That's sort of typical of Westerns. You have the bright sun reflecting on the desert sand. You have the canyons and the cacti and the bright blue sky and the clouds. And you have all that. And it's kind of hard to make that look bad. There are certainly films that have achieved that. There's certainly films that have made that look bad. In some cases, I think intentionally. But regardless, this film looks great. It's very visually engaging on that front. There's also a caveat within that cinematography. The visual storytelling within the first 10 minutes of this movie is great. There's very little dialogue. There's some that sort of boisters the visuals, but it doesn't result to exposition territory. The stuff that's shown, you either perceive it or you don't, and it's left up to you to figure it out. And I like that a lot. It's not something super complex to figure out, but it's enough that it challenges the audience just a little bit and doesn't go into a pandering territory. This is soured later when the film does get into exposition dialogue, especially when you know that the filmmakers can do visual storytelling and they're choosing not to. But regardless, the first 10 minutes is really solid. Another aspect that is absolutely phenomenal is the action scenes. Now, if I were to describe the action scenes broadly, you'd say, I've seen that before. And you're kind of meant to have seen that before because, again, this film is a tribute to basically every type of Western that's ever existed. But there are special little moments within those very generic Western action scenes that make it stand out. For instance, during the Native American raid on the settlement, a woman runs into an underground tunnel and the tunnel collapses on her. She uses the barrel of a shotgun and she sticks it through the dirt and she uses it to breathe through. I personally hadn't seen that before. Maybe you have, maybe it's in something I'm unaware of, but I thought it was interesting and I thought it was cool and it drew me back to the screen in something that I would most likely typically zone out through. And I appreciated that. All the action scenes have little moments like that that make you snap to attention and go, oh, that's kind of interesting actually. And I really appreciated that aspect of the film, and I wanted to single that out for kudos because it is unique. The characters themselves are all really well written. As a baseline, there's some poor dialogue that I'll get to later, but the characters' motivations all make sense. The actions that they take all make sense. There's never a scene where a character does something and you're like, okay, that seems a little strange. No, it always makes sense. And the characters' baseline attributes are enough for the actors to sink their teeth into and all give great performances. There's not a single bad performance in this film. Everyone does a phenomenal job. So that's definitely something to highlight as well. Now, with all that being said, I would like to cover some of the negative aspects of this film. The first and most obvious is what everyone criticizes it for. It resembles a TV show more than a movie. Now, I agree with half of that, and I disagree with the other half. The half I agree with is that it looks like a mid-budget AMC television show visually, especially in one scene in particular. There's a fire going on, and there's these embers floating across the screens, and it seriously looks like something I could do in Adobe After Effects. The embers are not colored properly, and they sort of jut out from the screen, and it almost makes it look 3D, and I guarantee you that was not intentional. That was the most jarring part of the cheap factor of the film. The rest of it you kind of get used to, and you get swept away in the scenic cinematography. But that scene really stood out, and unfortunately, it's very early in the film. So that is a little rough. The part of the criticism I disagree with is that narratively it operates like a TV show. I mean, factually, yes, that is true, but I don't view it as a negative. I think that was a stylistic choice from Costner and his crew, and I think it was sort of risky for the studio to allow them to do that because it is something different. Part two of this releases 2 months, no, not even, like a month from now. I mean, that's pretty ambitious. I liked that. I like that they're doing something different, and I want to reward that rather than criticize it because I like it. We always push these people to do new things, and then when they do new things, we criticize it. I'm not going to do that. I think it was a good creative decision, and I like it as a creative decision. My main problem with this film revolves around the fact that it is trying to be every type of Western ever, because you have these scenes of brutal violence that are clashing tonally with schmaltzy glorification of the West that you see in like the 50s and stuff like that. You'll have someone get shot in the back with arrows and have their child ripped from their arms, and then in the next scene, you'll have a, oh golly gee, that's the spirit of America moment. And that kind of stuff is where the bad dialogue comes in. Some of it sounds like it's from the Andy Griffith Show or Gunsmoke. It's very schmaltzy dialogue. It's like if Forrest Gump took place in the 1860s. That's what the dialogue is reminiscent of. And juxtaposing that with the brutal violence and the fact that this prostitute character is about to be killed by some outlaws and have her nephew child ripped from her arms is like getting whiplash going from scene to scene. That is the film's main hiccup. Overall, though, I do think this film is worth seeing. I think the cinematography is engaging enough that you won't be bored even throughout the 3 hours. I like the story with Kevin Costner and Abby Lee. I think that is worth admission alone. You know, you get these other stories that are wrapped around it. So it's like almost a bonus. And these other stories, even with those schmaltzy moments, are never boring. They're always visually interesting, and they don't necessarily not work. It's just that being juxtaposed with the brutal violence and going back and forth, it creates a tonal contrast that I don't think entirely works. But I recommend that you give this film your money because it's, one, doing something unique, two, looks really nice, and three, it's just ambitious to put out a part one and a part two so close together. And I like the idea of doing that. John Wick 3 and 4 was supposed to do that, I believe, and they ran into some production problems related to a certain illness that affected the entire globe. I think this film is worth your money to see it in the theater, whether that be the $5 matinee admission or the $12 regular price admission. I know that's depending on where you go and varying rates, but you understand my point. I think it is worth your money solely on the basis that it's trying something new, it's trying something risky, and the studio let them try something risky. Because if we don't financially support films that are taking a risk, there will never be a film taking a risk. And that's what every film critique video I see complains about. So this took a risk, and I'm going to reward it for it, and I recommend that you reward it for it as well. Because it is good. It has problems, but it's not boring to watch. It's not boring to look at. It's a good film. And I think that's all I got for the day. So like, share, subscribe, you know the drill, and I'll talk to you later.